Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of Christian History Chronicles that we enjoy doing here at the Center for Christian History to learn more in depth about some particular subject, particularly those that we think might have some great interest. And in addition to great interest, also are things that are maybe more pivotal and maybe some more dynamic parts of Christian history, particularly as people try to figure out what that means to them to do salt and light, and for them to understand what it means to do their own version of sanctification. And so, talking about the Synod of Dordt, believe it or not, is one of those, if that is not a term that you might be familiar with, is something that is very important to Christian theology and doctrine and what are things that are built from all of that. And fortunately for us, we have a person who has spent a good bit of time researching, reading, writing, teaching on this subject, specifically in the Synod. And this is Dr. Don Sinnema, who is the Emeritus Theology Professor at Trinity Christian College in Michigan. So, Don, thank
In
you for joining us.
Chicago.
Pardon?
So it's in the southwest side of Chicago.
Oh, it
Halen,
is? Trinity is. Okay, you're in
Halen
Michigan.
side,
My bad.
Chicago.
Okay. All right. Well, good. See, that's why I've told you from the beginning, I don't mind being the guy that needs to learn, okay, on each one of our episodes of that. So
Mhm.
thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yes, it's good to be here and it's good to share about the Synod of Dort. I've spent my whole career. I did my doctoral dissertation
Ah,
on the Synod of Dort, and since then have written quite a few articles about it. And in retirement, I'm focusing on it. I'm actually general editor of a 10-volume series to publish all the documents of the Synod of Dort.
really?
I can give you one
Wow.
sample here. Uh, Big thick volume. We've completed three of them. Um, I'm one of four general editors, but we have about 50 contributors, and it's a long-term project. Uh, I will never see the end of it, I'm sure, but at least I was involved in the first volumes.
There you
Anyway,
go.
it's a major part of my scholarship.
Great.
And the Synod of Dort, of course, was conducted in 1618, 1619. So it lasted 6.5 months. So it's a major synod in the Reformed tradition.
Well, tell us more about it. It's a great segue to tell us about what is the background that led up to the Synod actually be calling. You might even want to tell some of our listeners what does that mean? What is a synod? What is that? Just as an ecclesiastical term.
Yes, yeah. To clarify the term synod, it's like the term council, like the Council of Trent,
Hmm.
um, the Westminster Assembly. So these big terms refer to gatherings of leaders of some religious tradition, major gatherings, and typically these days synods are annual affairs for different denominations, um, especially in the Reformed tradition.
Hmm.
Synods are found in other traditions as well, but in the Reformed tradition, it's always called a synod. Now, the background, of course, is quite complex. The Synod of Dort was conducted in response to the Arminian controversy,
Hmm.
and maybe a little bit should be said about that.
Yes.
Um, Arminian, it's not Armenian controversy, it's Arminian controversy because it's named after Jacobus Arminius, who was a Dutch professor um, late 16th century, early 17th century. He died in 1609, 10 years before the Synod of Dort. Anyway, it was his views. He was teaching theology at Leiden University, which was the main center for theological instruction for anybody who wanted to become a minister in the Netherlands at that time. Um, he taught a view of grace. It's basically the doctrines of grace. That's what the whole issue was about.
Hmm.
And specifically the doctrine of predestination and the related points to predestination. So issues like um, who did Christ die for?
Mm.
All people or only the elect? Other issues like depravity. Are we totally depraved or partially depraved? Issues like how is conversion done? How does God convert people?
Mm.
Is and how much human input is there in that process of conversion? So, in other words, the working of grace in the act of conversion. That became a key point. And another one was the uh, perseverance of the saints.
Hmm.
Will believers can they lose grace at the end of their before the end of their life and then become unsaved? So those are the kinds of issues, so-called doctrines of grace, that were sort of all in a package together, um, that were at issue between the um, Arminius and his own followers and the so-called Calvinists or Orthodox Reformed people at the time. Um, and that controversy, well, started in the 1590s when Arminius wrote some things, and it escalated, for the next 20 some years. And it escalated to the point of almost civil war in
Wow.
the Netherlands. I mean, people were fighting in the streets already. So the Dutch government, in order to tamp things down and to bring peace in society, uh, called or convened the Synod of Dort, and that became a very important synod, probably the certainly the most important synod in the Dutch Reformed tradition,
Hmm.
but in the Reformed tradition as a whole, it would be up there ranking with the Westminster Assembly. In
Hmm.
fact, I consider Westminster Assembly and Synod of Dort about equal in status in terms of important synods within the Reformed tradition.
So, do you think is uh, Arminius writing the things that he wrote came out of just his own scholarship, after his own reflection, after his own study, that he kind of said, hey, I need to talk against what some prevailing Calvinist thoughts are? Or was it just, hey, I was just, you know, digging into the word, and this certainly seems the way that it's interpreted to me? Or what motivated him? Is there any scholarship around that or knowledge about?
Yes, he was a pastor. In
Hmm.
fact, he was one of the ministers in the Church of Amsterdam, so a
Okay.
very, very key church in the Netherlands. And out of his preaching and study of Scripture, of course, he came up with a somewhat different interpretation of some of these doctrines of grace. Uh, it was also within the context of certain statements by Reformed, Orthodox Reformed people, and in particular Theodore Beza,
Hmm.
who was the follower of Calvin in Geneva. Beza had,
He makes the cut for the big statue, right?
yeah, mhm,
Right.
right. Anyway, Beza had a somewhat extreme doctrine of predestination, um, more extreme than Calvin, definitely. And it's called supralapsarianism, which is a big term, but very simply put, it would be supralapsarianism is the idea that God considers people as not yet created, not yet fallen, when he predestined believers and unbelievers
Hmm.
before the foundation of the earth from eternity. So it's that idea that God predestines people without considering them as fallen creatures. So that's a fairly extreme reformed position.
Hmm.
Very few uh, reformed people hold that view, but there is that sort of minority stream there in the reformed tradition that was originated with Theodore Beza.
Okay.
And what really brought the controversy to the fore is Arminius studied in Geneva when he was a student
Ah.
under Theodore Beza, so he understood that background. Now he didn't raise an issue, as far as we know, back when he was a student, but when he was a pastor, he started rethinking this uh, whole issue and reacting against it. And um, then, when he became a professor in 1603 at the University of Leiden in the theology department, he was one of the key professors then to um, train ministers in the Netherlands. But in that department was also another professor, uh, Franciscus Gomarus. And Gomarus was a key follower of Beza. In other words, he
Mm.
also held to this extreme supralapsarian position. So here in the theology department, you get these two colleagues, and of course, they soon begin to clash, Beza and Arminius. So it was especially while Arminius was at Leiden University from 1603 until his death, 1609, that a lot of the conflict occurred, and some of Arminius's key statements about predestination were articulated.
So what type of who sponsored Leiden? I mean, was that a state university? Was it a church university? Was it a seminary? What was the
Well, it was a regular university. It's the first uh, university in the Netherlands after the Netherlands became independent. Well, I should qualify that a little bit. The Netherlands is in the midst of an 80 years war at this point,
hmm
from 1568 to 1648. They're trying to fight their way to independence from Spain because Spain had controlled the Netherlands up to this point, including Belgium. Anyway, um, this war was started for independence, and the northern provinces are basically independent at this point. They've fought their way free, but the war will continue then for another 30, 40 years. until the final independence of 1648. Anyway, this controversy occurred in what was called the truce. There was a truce between 1609 and 16, a 12-year truce, 1609 and 1621 or so. So it's right in that period where the controversy was the worst and the Synod of Dort occurred. Now, you asked about uh, the University of Leiden. The
Hmm.
university was started in that context. Um, it became the first university of the more independent Netherlands then. And it was started basically by the states, what's called the provinces of Holland,
Hmm.
um, set up that university um, in the late 1500s.
Well, was there anybody and we haven't even gotten to the Synod yet, but were there leadership, the governance of the university that ever came and had a conversation with Arminius during this time to say, "Hey,
Oh,
this
yeah.
is not you're not in line here, man. You gotta toe the company line on this one, right?"
Yeah, yeah, definitely there were leaders of the university. They were called curators, but
Okay.
they were appointed by the state of Holland, and curators largely wanted to keep the peace, right? So um, they wanted peace between both sides, and there must have been conversations. We don't have real much evidence about that, but the conflict itself was more between the leaders of the church
Mm,
who wanted to clamp down on Arminius's teaching
gotcha.
and the and Arminius and his followers.
Did he have was there any kind of correspondence or others with other professors at other universities and other seminaries and places that he was having this kind of dialogue with? Like, this is kind of we're fighting the fight here, if you will, call the fight. Maybe
Yeah.
that's a little bit strong, but I mean, we're yes, I see the same thing that you're seeing, or here's how I tweak
Mhm.
it a little bit, or whatever else it might be going. Was he having
Yeah.
that kind of cross-pollination, if you will, conversations?
He was dialoguing with other people, not so
Okay.
much people from other universities, but other Dutch leaders.
Uh-huh.
Um, so there were people that supported his position, but he's the one who articulated it in a very specific way that hadn't really been articulated
Mm.
before. But he certainly had, other pastors and religious leaders in the Netherlands and so on, who supported his position.
Okay. So what starts to kind of build up to actually have the government step in and say, we got to have a church meeting, right? I mean, it seems like
Yeah.
it's kind of almost like the Council of Nicaea in a sense, right? I mean,
Mm.
Constantine calls
Hmm.
them in and says, we got to get this thing solved. I may not be a great theologian, but I want peace in my valley. And if this is if
Yeah.
this is going to be easier and better for
Mhm.
us, let's call together and see what we could do to solve some of
Yeah.
these issues.
Maybe before we get to the
Yes.
actual convening of the synod by the Dutch government, we should look at Arminius's own position
Yes, please.
in summary. I
Yes.
mean, his view of predestination. Well, let me say it this way: the primary dynamic in that whole Arminian controversy has to do with God's sovereignty on one side and human responsibility on the other.
Hmm.
So the Reformed Orthodox Reformed emphasized God's sovereignty. Um, the Arminius and the Arminians put more emphasis on human responsibility. That's the big picture.
Hmm.
Now, specifically, what Arminius taught in respect to predestination is, and here it's good to clear up one misunderstanding. Often people think, well, Calvinists teach predestination and Arminians teach free will,
Hmm.
as if that's the main dynamic. That's oversimplification, and in fact, it distorts the issue because Arminius also teaches predestination, and Calvinists also teach free will.
Hmm.
So the issue was, how are these two related? The Orthodox Reformed position um, placed more emphasis on God's initiative, and the Arminians placed more emphasis on the human side. But both sides believed in both predestination and free will.
Hmm.
So that needs to be cleared up first. So
Good.
Arminius's specific position was that um, in salvation, basically the starting point is with the individual person who, out of their free choice, turns to God and believes. Okay?
Hmm.
So believes in Christ as their Savior. But God, in his eternity from before the creation of the earth, God foresees, from eternity before creation, he foresees that that person in history will
Hmm.
believe. And on the basis of what he foresees, he then, from eternity, predestines that person either to heaven or to hell. So, in other words, in Arminius's position, predestination is based on God's foreknowledge
Hmm.
of who will believe or will not believe. So there is a predestination there, but it's really based on the foreknowledge of what the person does. On the other hand, the Reformed position says that God, in his sovereignty from before the creation of the earth, takes the initiative. In salvation, God takes the initiative, and he, looks at all of these um, people on earth, fallen people. So the most Reformed people consider this as God predestining fallen people. That's the so-called infralapsarian position, rather than the supralapsarian position,
Ah.
considering people as not yet fallen. Anyway, the standard Reformed position is God from eternity predestines people who are fallen, and he takes the initiative to save them, or at least
Hmm.
save some of them, not everyone, but he saves them by working in their hearts and softening their hearts and turning their hearts to him, so that, including their will, he softens, bends their will so that they themselves believe. So it's not as if God believes for them, but the person, him or herself, actually believes, but God has been working in the background, so to speak, softening their heart so that they, out of their free will, then uh, believe in Jesus Christ and are saved. So the key point there is in salvation, God takes the initiative.
Mm.
And in the Arminian position, it's basically the person, human person, that takes the initiative. So right there, you've got the key difference between the two sides.
There's enough to create two sides, right? Pretty
Yeah.
easily, right? That's
Hmm.
however all that flows. Okay.
Hmm.
And so I think that's important for us to obviously to be able to think through, and thank you for the clarity on that, because it isn't just as easy just to say free will versus predestination.
Right,
I
right.
mean, I think that's a great uh, point to be able to make, because those of people who do think about these things on whichever side it is, I think
Hmm.
might take a quick, easy route of saying that instead of actually taking a little bit more time to understand the dynamics that we're going around.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So how does it build up to the synod then? That's what I'm
Yes.
super interested
Okay.
about.
So already during Arminius's lifetime, while he's at teaching at the University of Leiden, so he's in conflict with Gomarus,
Okay.
and it's largely a university conflict for a while, but then it spreads into the churches, of course,
Hmm.
as because these theology students become pastors and take one side or the other. So it starts spreading in the churches, and eventually it spreads into broader society, so that um, especially after Arminius died in 1609, um, his followers actually in 1610 met and drew up what is called the Remonstrance of 1610.
Okay.
And that remonstrance is the reason that the followers of Arminius are called remonstrants. So the remonstrance with a CE of 1610 is a document, and the followers then became called remonstrants, ANTS. Okay, it sounds pretty much the same when
Right.
I
But the
say it.
ants are the humans. The ants are the humans, and
Yeah,
the and the
it,
other is the document that
the
the ants
document,
believe in. Right.
right. And the document itself drew on Arminius's writings. So just about all of the document comes directly out of Arminius's own writings, but they summarized the key issues in 5 points, and they're known as the 5 articles of the Remonstrance, or 5 Arminian articles. So by drawing those together in 5 points, that really gave a focus to these articles. Um, Maybe I could just very quickly
Sure.
uh, tell you.
But I mean, was if I can interrupt your thought process, but
Yeah,
was the idea that, hey, look, we while it's kind of all fresh in our minds, and we're this, we need to put this down on paper so that we, at least as those followers, don't later go, well, no, I don't really think that's what he talked about, or I never heard him say that. Let's kind of agree and put this down in one document so that there's not any wiggle room or misremembering, or let's get it very key to this, because he's not
yeah.
around
I mean,
to clean it up.
they definitely wanted clarity, and they summarized it um, so that the controversy itself, I think, would have a clear focus. So,
Okay.
let's summarize it, says, to see what we're actually haggling about.
Sure.
So,
Good. Okay.
and I'm just reading here uh, what those 5 points are. Number one, uh, this is a summary of the 5 points, my
Okay.
summary of the 5 points. God predestines sinners based on his foreknowledge of their faith or unbelief.
Mm-hmm.
That's that predestination idea. Number two, Christ died for all people, but only believers are saved.
Mm,
So the extent of Christ's atonement. Number three, fallen man does not have saving faith by his own free will unless he is regenerated by Christ. Now, if you think through that one was not in controversy.
mm,
The Reformed people agreed that that was an orthodox statement taken by
mm-hmm.
itself. If you
Mm-hmm.
combine it with others, it's a problem, but that was not an issue. And then number four, God's grace is made available to humans, but no one can choose, no, but one can choose to accept or resist grace. So that idea of resistible grace.
It's a
And
big
then
one.
the final one, it's uncertain whether believers can fall from a state of grace. Now, initially, in 1610, then they weren't sure whether believers could fall from a state of grace. But a year later, 1611, at a conference in The Hague, they came to agreement that yes, believers can fall from a state of grace before they die. So there you have the uh, five articles of the Arminians. And those five articles then became the central point of discussion for the next decade.
Mm-hmm.
And over the next decade, there were pamphlets that were going back both ways, arguing in favor of those articles or against those articles. But the controversy just kept building, building, building. And as I mentioned, to the point of civil war, where there was fighting on the streets and the fishmongers uh, in the fish market in Leiden were clobbering each other with fish. I sort of imagine discussing these controversial issues too. So, so it became a national issue of maintaining peace and good order in society. So finally, the Dutch government, known as the States General,
Mm-hmm.
stepped in and called this National Synod then, which became the Synod of Dordt. Um, Actually, the background there is for about 20 some years, the Dutch government had control of who could call synods.
Oh.
So, so um, at that time you don't have separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm.
They're interwoven quite closely. The Orthodox Reformed people were urging for more independence of the church. Arminians, that's another uh, part of the controversy. Arminians preferred uh, the state to have certain control over the church.
Hmm.
So that was part of the whole controversy as well.
Oh,
But
wow.
uh, but anyway, um, the Dutch government, in other words, had control of calling synods, the National Synod, and there hadn't been a National Synod since 1586. So you can see um, 96, 106, 30 some years, there hadn't been a synod, and they were supposed to be called every 3 years,
Oh.
according to church order. but the Dutch government kept stalling, and um, they didn't want the church to have too much influence in society, and thought if you call a national synod, of course, the church is going to have more influence. But anyway, finally, because of the controversy, they agreed to call a synod in 1618. Um, and the synod lasted then for 6.5 months. And it was under the control of the States General. Um, Now, the churches could call their own delegates
Okay.
and send them to the synod, but the whole structure of the synod was basically determined by the Dutch government. So you have a lot of state influence there. Now, in the deliberations at the synod, well, there were also 18 state delegates
Huh.
appointed by the States General to be actual delegates on the floor of the synod. That's 18 out of about 100 delegates in total.
Now, were some
Uh,
of them were they all laity, or were some
yeah,
of
they
them?
were laity. They were
Okay.
laity. They were laity, but not ordinary laity. They tended to be um, civic leaders like
Okay.
judges and mayors and that sort of thing. So they were key political figures usually.
I got you. I got you. But now, and some of this come before we get into the actual synod piece itself.
Mhm.
Also, kind of context historical, right? I mean, the Dutch are just now really, really coming into their own after, and this is when we hear about the Dutch East and West Indies companies, and they're making
They're
money and they're
starting.
going all over the world and they're building
Yeah,
up. And so, might that have also been a part of the States General to go? The last thing I need to be worried about is internal things to do. We're
yeah,
trying to make things happen externally, and we just need to get this issue solved. And if we got fishmongers knocking each other in the head with fish, that's we're not keeping the trains running on time here. Okay, we got to be
yeah.
able to let's. This is not a good thing. Let's solve this
Uh-huh.
thing and kind of get this over. Is that an oversimplification that's kind of silly?
Yeah, that dynamic was certainly there. I mean, the
Okay.
Dutch East India Company was uh, working in what is today the Indonesian
Mm-hmm.
uh, islands, and and in North America already. So uh, the this is really the beginning of the Dutch Golden Age,
Mm-hmm.
when the Netherlands had huge fleets of ships going all over the world and having huge impact,
Mm-hmm.
and challenging the Spanish fleets and the English, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So the Dutch are just sort of at the beginning of that stage of developing into a major world power.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that dynamic is certainly there. Mhm.
Okay. Okay. So, but also, so there is just still one church. I mean, there's not like you're branching off and go, hey, we Armenians are getting out of here. We're just going to do our own church. You guys just
Mm.
go over there and do that. Idea certainly wasn't anything that was going on, right?
No, the Dutch Reformed Church was the one. It wasn't a state church,
Mm.
so it wasn't controlled by the state as such.
Like the Church
And
of England, for example, or something
yeah, it
like
wasn't
that.
a state church, but
Okay.
uh, what it's considered to be a privileged church.
Ah, okay.
A privileged church. In other words, the Dutch government provided the church buildings, often medieval churches that had been taken from the Roman Catholic Church and then given to the Reformed Church to use as their churches.
Hmm.
And the Dutch government also paid the salaries of the ministers.
Interesting.
So there it was definitely a privileged church. Now,
Okay.
not the only church, because Roman Catholics were still in the Netherlands. In fact,
Hmm.
they were still a majority of the population, but
Mm.
they were tolerated basically by the Dutch government, so they could worship as long as they sort of kept out of sight.
Gotcha.
And the same thing with the Anabaptists. In the Netherlands, uh, uh, you had the beginning of the Mennonite tradition
Hmm.
because it was actually started in the northern province of Friesland by Menno Simons.
Hmm.
He began the Mennonite movement up there um, at a place about 5 miles from where my grandfather was born.
Oh, really?
Anyway, anyway, there's monuments there to Menno Simons. But anyway, what my point here is that the Mennonites, who had become a significant movement even by then, um, were tolerated. So you have those different religious movements in the
Okay.
Netherlands. The Dutch Reformed Church was basically the one privileged church at this time.
Okay. Okay. So between what the government appointed some of the, would you call them delegates? Were they delegates to
Yeah,
the
they
synod?
were
Okay.
actual delegates.
Okay. And then each
We
church, could they choose who
Yeah,
they wanted to send, or was there kind of a criteria in place for people that were representing the churches?
okay. Yeah, so we're looking at participants then at the synod. First of all, you have um, the Dutch delegates from the churches,
Okay.
and they came in um, 11 different from 11 different synods. So, in other words, there were provincial synods already
Okay.
in the different provinces.
Sure.
So, Friesland had a synod, Groningen had a synod, Overijssel had a synod. Um, so you had these provincial synods. There were 11 of those, and each one of those synods sent generally six delegates,
Wow.
four ministers and two elders.
Okay.
So in all, there were about 60 Dutch delegates, and that
Okay.
actually included one delegation of Dutch professors.
Hmm.
So Dutch professors, there were five Dutch professors from five different universities and academies. At this time, there was Leiden University, Franeker University, and University of Groningen, but a couple of other academies as well. Anyway, they sent um, a theologian from each one, and that included Gomarus, who had
Ah,
been the opponent of Arminius. He was a representative from Groningen University.
okay.
Anyway, um, in all, then there were about 60 Dutch delegates. In addition, well, the synod was technically a national synod because it was dealing with a Dutch issue and
Hmm.
called by the Dutch government. So it's a national synod. But what's really important to recognize is that it has a broad international character. So the Dutch government invited other countries with significant reformed populations to send their best theologians. So 8 countries that were basically reformed sent their theologians.
Okay.
So you really had the leading Reformed theologians of all of
Hmm.
Europe present at the Synod of Dort. And that's what makes it such an important synod, besides the fact that it's dealing with such an important issue controversy. Anyway, I could give you a list of those countries. Um, let me
Sure.
just let me just quickly read them here. Um,
But they're mainly European, though, right? I mean,
yeah, they're all European countries. Here's my list. Great Britain, King James the First sent his own delegates. That was
huh.
actually the largest foreign delegation.
Okay.
The Palatinate. Now remember, there's no Germany at this time.
Right.
Germany is made up of about 300 little city-states and territories. So some of those territories are reformed. Many of them are Lutheran, and many of them are Catholic. But they're
Hmm.
all independent states, and that includes the Palatinate, where
Hmm.
Heidelberg is located, Hesse, Nassau, Wetteravia, Bremen, and Emden. So you've got five territories that are all part of Germany now.
Hmm.
But in addition to that, Geneva, Geneva was not part of Switzerland back then. It was its own city-state. And finally, the four Swiss cantons that were reformed.
Okay.
So Geneva plus the four Swiss cantons. Um, so in all, you had eight territories, foreign territories, who sent their best theologians to the synod. So that really gave it an international character. And these international theologians were given full voting status,
Oh, really? Okay.
along with the Dutch delegates. And it's important to recognize, too, that um, voting was not by delegate. They voted by delegation.
Ah,
So there were basically 19 votes, 11 Dutch delegations plus eight foreign delegations. So
like the Continental Congress did whenever America first got started, right? I mean, you voted by colony. You didn't vote by
yeah.
individual human like that, or even into the Articles of Confederation, right? They voted that way,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
interesting. Interesting.
So,
Okay.
so that's how all the voting in the whole synod occurred. Each delegation presented their own perspective on any issue.
And would you say
Anyway,
oh, go ahead. No,
the final um, participants would have been the 18 state delegates,
okay.
and they were there basically to represent the state's general, the government, and to regulate procedure and advise on procedure. So they didn't actually enter into the theological issues.
Okay.
So there is a separation of church and state to that extent that they were not participants in the doctrinal issues. But when it came to procedural issues and how to handle the remonstrance and so on, they had a very heavy influence.
Hmm.
The final participants were not delegates at all. Those were the Arminians.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, there were 15 Arminians. We call them cited or summoned Arminians, who were summoned leaders of the Arminian movement, who were summoned to the synod to answer for the Arminian perspective, to have their views uh, examined and adjudicated or judged.
Wow.
So they were seated in the middle of the floor around a table, 15 remonstrants.
Wow.
So,
They had to be pretty strong, right? To think that they were, I mean,
yeah,
they had to be as we might say, they were loaded for bear, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
had to, they had to be to know that they were taken. But I would assume that they felt strong enough about their beliefs that they weren't, they were ready to have the arguments, right? I mean, it's not like
Yes,
they were
except
the B team, were they? Okay.
they their perspective, what they wanted was to have a synod where the two sides would be equal
Mm,
and be able to dialogue over these controversial issues and come to some resolution as equal parties. Well, that's not how the synod was set up. That's not how the Dutch government set it up. And most synods, of course, most church synods are never set up as conferences. That's
right.
basically what they wanted, a conference between equals. And actually, back in 1611, there was a conference like that between six Calvinists and six Remonstrants. And they debated for at least 2 or 3 months
Wow.
and did not come to any resolution. So that had been that had taken place already. Um, so the Synod of Dort was a typical church synod.
Hmm.
So, throughout church history, synods have dealt with people who are considered heretics
Hmm.
or unorthodox in their doctrinal position.
Hmm.
And synods have made judgments about their views and either accepted them or rejected them. I mean, that's common
Sure.
uh, practice in church synods. So the Synod of Dort was set up in the same way. They wanted to examine and judge the remonstrant position. And that's why they brought in the Arminians in order to let them explain their viewpoint. So it wasn't judge them apart from their presence, but have them come and let them explain their position so that there could be clarity and there could be fairness about their position.
Well, and so well, so many questions keep coming to my mind about these pieces. One is how did the synod come down, and what were the positions that they came up with, right? The five, right, that we would would
Yeah.
we would
Mhm.
would talk about to do. And then let's talk about that, and then let's also talk about the aftermath. What happened to the 15? What happened to the rest of them after it was
Yeah.
all kind of
Mhm.
decided? I think
Mhm.
that would be an interesting part of the
Yes.
dialogue to talk
Mhm.
about.
Right. Right. Um, the Synod actually had four phases.
Okay.
The first phase, called the Pro Acta sessions, is before the Arminians actually arrived, and the Synod dealt with some issues like Bible translation and catechizing and so on. But then when the Arminians arrived, there was a period there from early December. The synod, by the way, started in middle of November, 1618,
Mm,
lasted till the end of May, 1619. So the Arminians arrived early December, and for the next 6 weeks, the synod engaged them personally,
mm,
but the Arminians took a stance that they would not cooperate with the synod because they did not consider the synod to be a lawful judge of their positions.
huh.
In fact, their argument was twofold. The synod is made up of our opponents. That is patently unfair. How can you have a synod made up of your opponents and come up with a fair judgment?
Mm,
And two, they said many of those synod delegates were part of a schism that started to separate the churches already before the time of the synod. Um, So in areas where the remonstrants were kind of a dominant part of the population,
Hmm.
some of the reform people would uh, separate from their churches because they were basically remonstrant churches, and so that was considered a schism then. So,
Wow.
uh,
Okay.
so for those reasons, they didn't consider the synod to be a lawful synod at all, and so they decided to basically just stall, not cooperate. This went on for 6 weeks. They
Mhm.
didn't even get into the doctrinal issues for 6 weeks. It was just procedural. And every possible procedural issue that you could think of, they brought up, and that had to be, of course, discussed.
Mm.
And there was all kinds of controversy about these procedures. And finally, um, the synod decided, well, we'll refer this to the Dutch government, the States General, and on January 1, the Dutch government issued a proclamation that the if they don't cooperate, then they should not be present in the synod, and the synod should examine and judge their views from their writings alone. So that's what happened. They gave them another 2 weeks, and that just got worse. And finally, on January 14, 1619, the the president of the synod, Johannes Bogerman, was so upset with them that he expelled them from the synod in an angry speech.
Wow.
Uh, you can't uh, give him excuses for that. There's no excuse for how he handled that. But it wasn't that he just did it in a fit of rage. He had the Dutch government already saying that that's what should be done, and the synod had discussed all this, and especially the Dutch delegates were in favor of getting rid of the Arminians, and then finally the foreign delegates agreed that this wasn't going anywhere, and so we had to get rid of the I mean, get rid of the cited remonstrants. So on January 14, then they were expelled from the synod.
So we
So
shouldn't think of this as, maybe watching a courtroom drama where this one gets up and tells its side, then this one gets up and tells its side, and no, 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 let's go argue that point. It wasn't these 15 against these 70 plus humans versus their ideas were done that way, but it was done because they took it from the writings because they were being such cogs in the wheel and trying to gum this, and
yeah,
so upset about all of it that finally they just said, you know what? We don't have to have you guys here anymore. We've
yeah.
got enough of your things of what you've written about. We're going to take it
Hmm.
from here. Get
Hmm.
on back to wherever you've been from. We're moving forward. I mean,
Yes, yes. Yeah, before they were expelled, it was actually set up kind of like a courtroom said. The synod was going to discuss this issue and then give the remonstrants their turn to respond to it. It was set up that way so that both sides could
I got
have
you.
equal say. But when the remonstrants didn't cooperate, that went nowhere. And so when they were expelled, that brought forward a whole new phase of the
Sure.
synod in which the synod responded then to the Arminian controversy. And the
Right.
highlight of that third phase was the drafting of the Canons of Dort.
Okay.
So the Canons of Dort was the direct response to the five articles of the Arminians.
And those
That's
five
that.
canons are what we would call today, primarily, if we had to sum it up, as the 5 points of Calvinism. Is that
Yes,
fair?
yes. Um, sort of fair.
Okay.
I'll talk about this later, maybe. I'm not in favor of that phrase, 5 points of Calvinism.
Okay.
I can give you reasons for that, but basically, you're right. The 5 points are the 5 points of the canons of Dort, which were in response to the five Arminian points.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Gotcha.
So before we get into the canons as
Yes.
such, let me just quickly mention that there was a fourth phase of the synod.
Okay.
Um, in the last month, May, the foreign delegates, this is after the canons were approved, the foreign delegates were released. They could go back home. And the Dutch delegates just met on their own, dealing with uh, Dutch church issues, especially church order. So, um, and Sabbath observance and a number of issues like that. So that happened in that last phase called the post-Octa sessions.
Okay.
But if we go back to the third phase, when the canons was developed, we can talk about that for a while.
Sure. Well, I
Um,
mean, well, do tell us what those five canons were. What were the things specifically that they came
oh,
up with?
well, those are the same 5 points that I read from the um,
But that's
the
what the
five.
remonstrances were, right? I
Yeah,
mean, so it's
but
basically you can say it's that.
yeah, okay. The 5 points would be the first one, predestination. The
Mm-hmm.
second one, atonement of Christ, the extent of the atonement. The third one, um, depravity, often called total depravity. The
Mm-hmm.
fourth one, how uh, how conversion happens. In other words, the working of grace in conversion. And the fifth one, um, perseverance of the saints.
Gotcha.
So those are the 5 points of the canons of Dort in response to the same 5 points of the remonstrance. Now, in the canons, remember I said the third point of the remonstrance was
Mm-hmm.
not in controversy.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened is they combined three and four together
Okay.
as one point, even though there are 5 points, they call it three and four, but they're actually combined in one chapter in the canons.
Okay.
And that had been ever since 1611. So for the last 8 years, that had been combined already.
Okay.
So that's a little oddity that two chapters are
Okay.
together into one chapter.
Okay. Okay. All right. So what happens to those 15 or anybody else that were subscribing to the Arminian thought after this? The synod has been done. It's been issued. The seal has been put on it. The whatever it's been
Mhm.
distributed, and now it is the law of the land, or at least the law of the church of the land.
Church,
And so it. What happens if I still, you guys can go down there at your kangaroo court and come up with whatever it is you want to do. I mean, but nonetheless, I still believe these other things.
yeah. Yeah. Before I get into
Oh,
that,
okay.
let, let's talk a little bit about the drafting of the canons.
Okay, sure.
Um, Sometimes people think that the canons were just slapped together pro forma as a way of knocking down the Arminian 5 points. But
Mm-hmm.
um, it took about 3 months at the synod to draft the canons.
Wow.
It
Okay.
was a very, very meticulous and careful process. And remember, the leading Reformed theologians of all of Europe are there,
Mm.
and they're all working at this together. Now, they do have a number of differences, even with among themselves.
Hmm.
And there were some real conflicts, even on the floor of the synod, um, even to the point of uh, a delegate from from Bremen, Martinius, who entered into such a debate with Gomarus, the
Okay.
Martinian, that Gomarus challenged him to a duel,
Wow.
a literal duel. Now they calmed that down, but I mean that's how furious
It got that
the
heated.
debates got, and that was actually about the issue of the extent of the atonement. So there were the English delegates and the Bremen delegates tended to be a little more on the side of the Arminians on that particular issue.
Interesting.
Not totally on their side, but wanted more emphasis on Christ dying for all. So anyway, that's a long process, and finally in April, mid-April, they um, came up with the canons. They actually um, sent it to committee. Um, so there was a committee of 9 people who actually drafted the canons.
Okay.
Uh, Half of them were Dutch delegates, half of them were foreign theologians. So it was a pretty prestigious committee. They drew up the canons, and then it went back and forth to all the
Ooh.
delegations. They had to have their input. They
Ah,
would suggest, oh, change the wording here, um, and go back to the committee. It went back and forth 3 or 4 times to the committee, and finally they came up with the final draft, which was adopted by the whole synod. Every Dutch and foreign delegate signed on to the canons. So they came to the point where they all agreed. However, um, the result was that the canons were what I consider somewhat of a moderate document.
hmm.
Often people consider it, extreme Calvinism, but it's not. It's a more moderate document, and part of the reason for that is that for all of these delegates to agree on this, they had to make some compromises
Sure.
in accommodation in how you phrase this or phrase that. So, just for example, on the second chapter on the extent of Christ um, in atonement, that was a key point of division. But they finally came to an agreement that conceded something on both sides. So the old medieval distinction between the sufficiency of Christ's death for all people, Christ's death is sufficient for all people, and the efficiency or effectiveness of Christ's death only for some people, both of those emphases are in the canons.
Oh, really?
The universal sufficiency for all and the effective um, atonement of Christ only for the elect. So that was a compromise, especially with the Bremen and English delegates. But
Hmm.
it's that sort of thing that makes the canons a more moderate document than is often supposed. So um,
No wonder
that's how,
your volumes are this thick on what you're on the volumes that you're working on. That much
yeah.
conversation and dialogue and
Uh-huh.
research and going back and forth and making my point, and this one's
Yeah.
making the sub point to the sub point. No wonder
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
thing's as thick as it is, right?
We're doing 10 volumes like
Gee
that.
whiz.
Uh, And yeah, the reason 6.5 months of synod produced a lot of paperwork, and we're including, of course, the Arminian documents. They submitted a lot of paperwork as well. Basically, after they were expelled from the synod, they weren't allowed to go home.
Really?
After they were expelled, they still had to remain in Dordrecht and be ready to answer questions, even though they weren't invited on the floor of the synod. But they used that time to write up their position on each of
Mm.
the five articles in great detail. And we're working right now on one big fat volume of all of their writings
Gee whiz.
at the time of the synod. Yeah.
Wow. Well. Well, let's fast forward
Yeah.
well, not crazy fast forward, but let's just go forward a little bit, right? And say,
Uh-huh.
well, how did it all kind of settle out at the end? Well, one quick question. I'm sorry. Why in Dort? Why there? Why did they call it to be at that location?
Yes. Dort, of course, is a short form abbreviation of Dordrecht, the city of Dordrecht. It's a little to the southeast of Rotterdam,
Okay.
on an island there. Um, anyway, that was historically the city where the Dutch government, I mean, where the Netherlands was founded.
Oh,
So historically, politically, that had great significance.
gotcha.
And yeah, that's one of the main reasons
I
why
got so
that
it'd be kind of like
that
going to Independence Hall for us in America, maybe to go
yeah,
back and
yeah,
say,
sure. Sure.
"Hey, this is where a lot of things actually started. This would be a good place for us to do it," and
Right.
it would show
Mhm.
that emphasis. Okay, I'm sorry. So tell us about the how did it all settle at the end?
Yeah, well, in the uh, later sessions of the third phase, the
Mm-hmm.
synod came up with what was called a sentence of the 15 remonstrants.
Ah, okay,
So this was a personal judgment of them because the synod had already judged the remonstrant ideas
mm-hmm.
and accepted the canons of Dort as the Orthodox Reformed response to the Arminian controversy. But now they wanted to specifically deal with the persons, so a sentence of those persons. And that sentence basically uh, meant that they were relieved of their ecclesiastical positions.
Okay,
So, um, yeah, they were no longer uh, uh, part of the leadership of the Dutch Reformed churches. Now they weren't actually cast out of the churches.
okay,
They were still allowed to be members of the churches, but they couldn't be ministers and theologians and so on. So that was their sentence. Now, after the synod, the Dutch government, this is apart from the synod itself,
okay.
The Dutch government uh, banished the leaders. Many of those remonstrants at the synod were then banished from the country,
Wow.
and that unless they would accept the canons of Dort, and of course they wouldn't accept the canons of Dort, so um, they were banished from the country. Mostly went to Antwerp or Paris, France, or some other country that tolerated them. Um, Now that lasted until about 1526, so the next 5, 6 years. Then they were allowed to return because the Dutch government had typically been tolerant of different religious views. So they were allowed to return. And by this time, the Arminians themselves had set up their own separate denomination. So they pulled out of the Dutch Reformed churches, and they were called the Remonstrant Brotherhood.
Wow. Okay.
So
Never even heard of that. Okay.
they set up their own denomination. It was a minority denomination, and that, like the Catholics and the Mennonites, that was tolerated
Mm.
by the Dutch government. So, and they continued then to be tolerated in the Netherlands, and until the 19th century when finally you have separation of church and state, and then everything is open.
Are there any denominations or worship groups or anybody that could had their founding in those Remonstrance brothers that we would see
Yeah,
today?
there's still churches in the Netherlands that
Okay.
are called the Remonstrant Brotherhood.
Oh,
It's a very small minority, but they still have their churches, and they have their seminary. So
hmm,
it's still in existence, but actually, over the centuries, the Remonstrants became more affected by rationalism. The 18th century rationalism,
sure.
reason became more important in religion, and the Remonstrants were open to that. So
Okay.
uh, the result is that the Remonstrant movement as such became more liberal in their theology.
Okay. Interesting. Wow. How impactful. Well, I mean, when we talk about things, I think some people are surprised to find out how much detail, how much passion, how much weight that people gave specific doctrinal components and pieces
Mhm.
that would really end up making that, developing as we would just, think about how the church developed, right? It was a lot easier when the Pope said, "This is the story and it's over and it's
Yeah.
done," right? And so, but you get, just like everybody's got a nose, everybody's got an opinion, right? And so if you
Mhm.
throw that open and you take something like the Protestant Reformation that just knocks it
Mhm.
all wide open, what's it going to look like eventually? It may be 100 years like this,
Yeah.
literally, right? Before we
Yeah.
start to make some of those decisions. And that's just what was
Mhm.
happening there. That didn't count what was happening in other parts of the world. So, what a
Mhm.
fascinating time. Well, man, thank you so much. You have really given us great information today. And so, thank you
Did
for
did
the
you
work.
did you want me to talk about tulip a little
Oh
bit?
yes, let's forget. I forgot about that. Let's talk about the tulip. Okay, give us your tulip
Okay.
thought processes.
Yes. Um, Often the canons of Dort are understood in light of this acronym TULIP. The 5 points: total
Hmm.
depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and perseverance of the saints.
Hmm.
TULIP. Um, I consider that very reductionistic, and it's an oversimplification and distortion of the actual teachings of the canons. I mean, the canons themselves are about 20 pages long in translation, and it's not that ponderous a document. And there are good translations now available. I was involved in one translation in 1987. Um, it's a readable document.
Okay.
It's intended to be a popularly written document. So the TULIP acronym has been a way to sort of boil that down into this one 5 point acronym that everybody can remember. And when I was taking catechism classes as a young student, we all learned TULIP because that was an easy way to remember the 5 points, right? Um, the problem is actually multitude. Um, you'd think TULIP was some old acronym that went back to the 16th, 17th century or something. Actually, TULIP was invented not in the Dutch Reformed tradition.
Hmm.
It was invented in the American Presbyterian tradition
Oh, really?
by a Presbyterian minister, McAfee, in New Jersey in a speech he gave on the 5 points of Calvinism.
Really?
He, as that's been traced, he's the first to actually come up with the TULIP acronym. So it's a recent invention.
I'll
And
be.
and in fact, in Dutch, it doesn't even work. The Dutch word for tulip is tulp. It has only four letters, and it just makes no sense.
Well, the Dutch know about tulips more than anybody else, right? So
Yeah,
we ought to take their
right.
word on that.
Yeah. So it's it's also an acronym that uh, puts the 5 points in the wrong order. Tulip is actually T is actually point three of the canons, not point one. The proper order would be ULTIP, ULTIP. So the order is wrong, and by putting T first, that sort of overemphasizes T. And remember, T, total depravity, that was the point of the remonstrance. That was not a point of controversy.
Right.
So, so it skews things in that way. Um, and then if you look at each of the 5 points, and I won't go through each of them, but I've got criticism on each of those 5 points. Um, for example, total depravity can easily be misunderstood as absolute depravity, that
Hmm.
all we do forever is only sin. That's not biblical. And total depravity can be applied to Christians and often has been. And that's not what the canons teach. Canons teach that only unbelieving people are sort of totally depraved
Mm.
in the sense that they cannot earn their own salvation and so on. But even there, the canons say that unbelieving people can do civic good. Um, they can be good friends. They can be
Be good
honest.
neighbors, right?
Yeah, right.
Help you
So,
build your roof back. I mean, help
right.
you, whatever, right?
Right, right. So total depravity is really an extreme term in that way. Uh, let me pick one more here. Irresistible grace, the I.
Hmm.
Canons do not even teach irresistible grace. That's just a falsity. Um, in fact, of those 5 points of TULIP, the only one that's mentioned in the canons is perseverance of the saints. None of the others, those phrases don't appear in the canons. Now, to focus more specifically on irresistible grace, the canons themselves mention that grace is resistible. I mean,
Hmm.
that very term is used in the canons. So, how you get irresistible grace out of the canons, it's just not true. Um, what the canons teach is that God's grace will overcome our human resistance. So we can resist. In fact, Paul resisted kicking against the pricks. Our unbelief our, is acts an act of resistance. We
Yeah.
resist. Every time we sin, we're sort of resisting God. We can resist, but the point of the canons is God's grace will overcome our resistance. That's the
Right.
point. Not
Right.
that not that all grace is irresistible.
Right. Gee whiz. So much. I mean, it's
Hmm.
here to do. Thank you. We have really enjoyed our conversation. I'd say it's more than a conversation. We got both barrels today, right? We
Mm.
got all the learning that we might need for quite some period of time. Dr. Don Sinnema, who is the professor of theology emeritus from Trinity Christian that I now have better understood is in Chicago and not in anywhere in Michigan. So that was my bad on homework there. But thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your scholarship and the amount of energy and effort that you have put to this that help other people understand better about the things that they believe. And that's part of what we're about doing here at the Center for Christian History. So if those of
Mhm.
you who would like to follow along, make sure you can follow our social media. And there also will put a link in to show you more about where you can connect with some of the books that Dr. Sinnema has written and authored and or edited and been around, so that you can learn more about this synod and the work that was accomplished there. So
Yeah, let me make a little pitch here for
absolutely, there it is.
my new book. Came out last year. The Synod of, if you can see that, the
Yes,
Synod
we
of
can.
Dort, Synod of Dort, 1618, and the Canons, Historical Perspectives, put out by Reformation Heritage Books last year. What I did in this volume is collect all the articles that I've written over 40 years
Okay.
about the Synod of Dort and the canons, put them all together, and included a number of articles that had never been published,
Oh, okay.
um, which I had done in conference papers and so on, worked
Sure.
them into articles. And so there are, I think, 18 different articles there that I've collected, but they cover all aspects of the synod. So
Okay.
it's the, I consider it the only book that gives a comprehensive overview of all of the aspects of
Okay.
the synod. A lot of, with the 400th anniversary a few years ago of the synod, 2018, 2019, I think about 15 books were published, but they each deal with some aspect or other.
Okay.
I'm trying to be comprehensive in my volume.
Okay. Very great. Thank you again so much. We appreciate your time and we appreciate your efforts.
Yes, well, it's been my pleasure to talk about this, and I hope that it can be of good benefit to your listeners.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.